Okay, so I just wanted to talk about something that's in your chapter number 10, the chapter on religion and reform. Now you're going to be doing an assignment about the Second Great Awakening, and that part of the chapter dovetails into the topic I'd like to talk about today, and that is something called Transcendentalism, or a movement that was founded by who we call the Transcendentalists. Now that is a mouthful. I've said it a few times before, but it always kind of tongue-ties me. So I'll put the word up there. Of course, you can refer to your chapter too. All right, well, who were the Transcendentalists? They came out as a reaction to a couple of things. One was the Second Great Awakening and this huge religious revival that saw the rise in denominations like the Methodists. The Transcendentalists really had an intellectual foundation or underpinning, and their founding is associated with Harvard University. Now at first, they were made up of strictly ministers, or mostly ministers, people who thought intellectually about religious Christian ideals and doctrine, all right, and who were looking at what was going on with things like the Second Great Awakening and saying, okay, we're not buying all of these ideas that the evangelical itinerant preachers are going around the country talking about. All right, so the Transcendentalists included ministers, but as they grew and people showed interest in them, they started to include people outside of religious life: intellectuals, writers, literary critics, social reformers, those type of people. And we're talking right smack dab in the middle of the 19th century. So this is where we are there, still leading up to the Civil War here. So this is a condition of social and cultural changes that are happening. A lot of them are happening because of what you studied last week, the market revolution. And these are kind of maybe opposed reactions to what was happening in the market revolution, with lots of people being interested in profit and making money and advancing industrial technology and those kinds of things. All right, so 4 key players in the Transcendentalist movement, although there were many. The first, probably the most important, is Ralph Waldo Emerson. All right, he was a minister who started thinking about some of the ideas of the Second Great Awakening and wanted to revise some of those ideas and talk about it with his fellow Transcendentalists. The second most famous is probably David Henry Thoreau, and I'll talk about him in a second. Another one that's notable is Margaret Fuller, who was what your book calls a proto-feminist, somebody who was interested in women's rights. And the fourth one is Elizabeth Peabody, who was an educational reformer, among other things. Now, all these people wrote extensively too, and the big way to get your message across was to write essays, to write arguments, and they all did that. Okay, so the main belief of the Transcendentalists, if we're going to put it in a nutshell, they wanted to think about the relationship between the spiritual world and human beings, which is maybe a ancient way of thinking about the world. All right, so their main belief was that there is a spiritual purpose that is contained in each person, and that spiritual purpose or spiritual entity is to guide the individual's moral actions. So it's a matter of maybe self-searching to find that spiritual element within each person. One of the things that they use to kind of simplify this is they used 4 elements to be aware of when you're thinking about this connection to your spiritual self. Those 4 elements are soul, spirit, mind, and reason. Soul, spirit, mind, and reason. All right, so they took these 4 elements, they might take them and expand on them and write about them and talk about what they mean when it means to discovering your spiritual self. Things that they emphasized beyond these 4 elements in their main belief, they emphasized the condition of individualism. That resonated with Americans, I think, already by that time, quite a bit. optimism. They had an optimistic view on life. They're very interested in nature and the role of human beings in the natural world. Also, a very positive and progressive view of the future. They spent a lot of time thinking about how it could be a better future if some changes were made, more and more people tapped into this individual self-spirituality, and less obsession or emphasis on the past, or I hate to say it, history. All right, so they were progressive, forward-looking people. They like to think so anyway. All right, they outwardly, in other words, in their writing and their speeches and their talking, they outwardly emphasized America as a unique, special place, and a place to really cultivate this progressive future outlook. So they were privileging America over all the other places in the world, especially Europe. The Transcendentalists said that there has to be a unique experience for the Americans because their geography, their history, their ability to throw off the ties of tyranny and the revolution, all of these things gave them sort of the lead when it comes to advancing the human race. All right, so the Transcendentalists said that their ideas would be able to advance the human race. Now, I want to talk about David Henry Thoreau just a minute. He was a Transcendentalist. He was an interesting guy, quirky guy, kind of a grumpy, maybe crusty kind of guy. But he had definite ideas about how people should live. And he was really critiquing the excesses of the market revolution, all that interest in making money and power and money and those kinds of things. So he was kind of like a little bit of a free spirit for his day. So David Henry Thoreau urged in his writing a simple type of living, a direct and intense communion with nature, and an emphasis on self-sufficiency. His most famous work, although he wrote quite a few, his most famous work probably is Walden. Walden was about his experiences from 1845 to 1847, when he gave up all the trappings of what then was a modern life in the market revolution, and he went and he lived in a cabin that he built for himself in the woods, next to this little pond called Walden. So in 1854, he wrote about his experiences then, and he published the book called Walden, which is an American classic. It's very American, it's very sort of soul-searching, but it really is qualified, but it has a unique Americanness to it. So Walden, this is a blurb that I found about Walden. Walden explores natural simplicity, harmony, and beauty as models for just social and cultural conditions. So Thoreau didn't want to just go out there and live in nature and eat nuts and berries and chop his wood and that kind of thing. He was trying to make a connection between what it means to be American and self-sufficient through his own experience of trying to find out what it's like to be in nature. Not the best explanation, I know, right here off the cuff. I hope you get some of the idea there. All right. Now, the whole transcendentalist message in a nutshell I may be able to conclude by saying, and the reason I'm hurrying so much is I'm afraid my battery on my video camera is going to run out. But if I say that, then I'm actually extending the video, so I better shut up and get to it. Communal living, Transcendentalists believing that communal living is a response to capitalist conditions. All right, so communal living was also emphasized by the Transcendentalists. Cooperative living is another way. You kind of pool your resources, you live in a group, and you make decisions collectively. That was a definite response to the individual money power kind of thing of the market revolution. Last thing I'm going to say really quickly, it was a response to the rise of industrialism and market revolution, which is kind of a redundancy because I think I said that a couple of times already. All right, sorry for the hurry, but battery power is something I have to worry about too.